Hey, Bob, welcome to Shaboom.
Delighted to be with you, Rick, as always.
Well, you and I go back a long ways, and I have repeatedly told everybody that not only are you one of the best human beings I know, which you are, you're also, like me, way outkicked your coverage with your bride, who is a genius in terms of sewing. And I have been so impressed with some of the things you've recently shared with me, with her doing a lot of historical clothing as you all have settled into Virginia. But I've told people repeatedly that you're the best strategist I've ever known. And that is a great segue into what you're doing now, because I think your skill set is so vital to this organization you're working with now, the American Battlefield Trust. So I can assure you that 99.9% of our listeners do not know anything about the American Battlefield Trust, but they need to. So tell me a little bit about the trust and what you're doing with the trust.
Sure, happy to. And with regard to your kind words about my wife, I would definitely say I married up.
It's a good club to be in.
There's there is no doubt about that. But and to your 99.9, I think that actually might be overstating it, Rick. It might be 0.99. It is, I think, safe to say one of the most important organizations in our country that basically no one has heard of. And what the American Battlefield Trust is about is its mission is to preserve, educate, and inspire. And what I mean by preserve is preserve the land on or around the battlefields that our founding conflicts were fought on. And by founding conflicts, we mean the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and the War of 1812, which is often forgotten about. And so the trust has done, I think, an admirable job over its about now 25 years in existence. We have protected about 60,000 acres now. And yet, Rick, every day land is under threat. And to take just a minute on that, our chief challenge now is data centers. You know, and the people that build those seem to have no end of financial resources and can pay double, triple, sometimes more than that, the market rate for land. And that's a particular challenge in the state I live in, Virginia, particularly Northern Virginia, which is, as many of your listeners might know, actually the data center of the world. About 70% of the world's internet traffic passes through servers in Northern Virginia. Anyway, so it's really important to preserve the land so that the stories can be told. And I know you know, as one of the great storytellers I have ever met in my life, I know you know the power of storytelling. And so the land serves as, if you will, a vehicle to tell stories. And so preserving it is essential if we're going to preserve our history. The education part of it, is sorely needed. As you know, we don't do a great job of educating in our country in general, if I may. Now, higher education, different story, but at the lower levels, we don't do a great job, and we particularly don't do a great job with history education.
And so, therefore, history continues to repeat itself.
It does. I will throw out a fact for you and for your audience. Only 13% of eighth graders in our country are proficient in their knowledge of U.S. history. Said another way, 87% are not proficient. So almost 9 out of 10.
That's staggering.
It is staggering, and it's getting worse. And so, the question arises, how can we ask our young people particularly, how can we ask them to value something they know nothing about? how do they value the United States of America if they don't know its story and stories? And so that's why education is really important to the trust, and that they have a number of ways to do it. It's amazing, actually, the reach that they have through various means. They provide lessons plans to teachers. They provide materials, even field trips, as quaint as those might seem these days. Uh, Rick, that we even publish graphic novels to try to reach kids in the way that they're comfortable comfortable receiving information. And so, overall, through all these various means, social, digital, and real space and time, the trust reaches about 30 million people a year, and about 75% of those are students. And the inspire part has to do with, wanting to learn more, really wanting to learn more about our country, its history, and then act to try to do whatever they might be able to do to help us preserve, protect not just our battlefields, but our country. So
I think it would shock a lot of Americans to know that had the trust not come along, some of our what I would consider to be more sacred battlefields, places like Gettysburg,
yeah,
would have been developed. I
yeah,
mean, there'd be a shopping mall or a motel sitting on a place where Americans spilled their blood,
yeah.
and yet the trust has been able to come in and do that.
It's so true. I mean, you could go down the list of the iconic battlefields in just the Civil War. Manassas is another one that would have been developed. There's no question without the efforts of the trust, and the trust works with partners. That's essential. You mentioned we'd like to talk a little bit more a little later about the Medal of Honor and the Medal of Honor Valor Trail, and a trusted partner of the trust is the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. So is the National Park Service. And so these partnerships are essential because no one organization can do it alone. So what we're trying to do, overall, preserve, educate, inspire, so that generations, this isn't for old guys like you and me, Rick. This is much more about
Yeah,
our
yeah. In my
kids and
case,
their
it's my
kids.
grandkids. My
Yes.
grandkids being able to understand what happened and the relevance of why that matters and why we have the value system that we have, and
Yeah.
who made sacrifices. And I remember years ago, I I interviewed for a job at Bowdoin College in
Yeah.
Brunswick, Maine,
Mm.
and this is right before Charlotte and I got married. She laughed, as a Florida girl. She said, "You're going to get this job and drag me off to Maine." The mascot of the school were the polar bears. And she was
Who
like,
knew? Who
"Yeah."
knew?
And she was, but interestingly enough, one of the most famous alums of Bowdoin College was Joshua Chamberlain, who was maybe the pivotal move at Gettysburg that changed the course of that battle, with the pivot, and what he was able to do. Well, those are the kinds of stories Americans need to know. They need to know about valor, about bravery, about sacrifice,
Yeah.
and where better to do it than where it actually happened.
Well, that's right. I mean, it comes to life there, and on the ground. But the other thing that the trust is a big believer in is trying to augment reality, if you will, and through augmented reality, through apps, the stories that are on the battlefield that take place on whatever battlefield can be brought to life in a device that you hold in your hand. And you can do that on site or you can do it off site. And again, how are we going to reach young people, Rick? I mean, that is the way our world works now. And if we want to reach young people and help them understand, help them value our country and what it stands for, then we've got to communicate with them the way that they would like to be communicated with. And so you're right. The battlefields are important, and the extensions of the battlefield are as important as them themselves.
Well, we have a big anniversary coming up next year with the 250th birthday of America, and I would think there's a bunch of exciting things being planned around, different states and different places. I think one of the things people need to understand is when the trust purchases the land and develops the land or tries to return it to what it looked like it during that era, then they give it away in many
They do.
cases. They give it to the Park Service or give it to a state park. Talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that process.
Well, this is all about partnerships. As I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and so the trust has, if you will, a small army of folks that are always on the lookout for land that is under threat. They have people that are skilled in the real estate business, that are attorneys in the real estate world, that when it comes time, and oftentimes these are tracts of land, Rick, that have been passed down through generations, especially in the part of the world that I live in, through generations, sometimes centuries old owners that at some point in time have decided, you know what, it's time for us to sell our farm. And so the first step is awareness. And then once awareness is gained, then it's about building a relationship with the landowners. Because oftentimes the landowners would prefer, most often they would prefer to have the land preserved in some semblance of its original condition, not turned into a shopping mall or a subdivision. And so the relationships are often key, and the trust employs people whose job basically is that, to develop relationships with landowners. And then the negotiations begin, because there's pressure. I mean, the land that's owned, sometimes they're large tracts. They're sometimes in rural areas, sometimes in suburban areas, but they're always highly sought after by a number of parties. And so the trust enters into negotiations, and then if they're successful, then of course the process continues with how we've secured the land. How then are we going to develop it, if you will, for storytelling? How can we make it a part of an existing tract? How can we turn it in, for instance, to a state park, which was just done at Brandy Station, Virginia, a site of a pivotal battle in the Civil War, the largest cavalry battle ever in North America, by the way. So through a combination of efforts by the trust and the state of Virginia, a piece of land that had been in private, actually several pieces of land that had been in private hands for generations, was purchased by the trust, turned over to the state of Virginia, and now has become a state park. Brand new, Rick.
Wow.
Dedicated in 2024 and is known as Culpeper Battlefield State Park forever. Yeah,
Yeah. That land is now never going to be developed.
absolutely right.
And so for generations, they'll know what happened at Culpeper. The story will be told. You can see that. And, I was fortunate. My dad was a huge history buff. And we were constantly going to battlefields,
Yeah.
because he loved the stories. Now, in that era, he also owned a metal detector. and in many cases, we would go looking for Civil War bullets or those types of things. You can't
Yeah.
do that. But in places that were not park land, but had been battle land, we often found, belt buckles and, and musket balls and a variety of those kinds of things. And
Sure.
then my children laughingly say I drug them off to every battlefield, across the country. But that's how you learn. And if parents don't think it's important, then the only opportunity a young person's going to have is that field trip.
Yeah.
And who knows that a child will be mesmerized by a place, a story that will then make them lifetime learners for other historical, things.
It's impossible to know. You're on a good point. It's impossible to know, but we have to give them the opportunity.
Yeah,
That's
no
that's
question.
what's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's segue. Let's talk about this unique partnership between the American Battlefield Trust and the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. Let's
Sure.
start with tell everybody what about the society, and then how these two organizations are partnering,
Sure.
and why it's important.
Yeah, sure. Um, well, the Congressional Medal of Honor Society is the only Medal of Honor affiliated organization to be chartered by the U.S. Congress. And that is why the name Congressional Medal of Honor Society. A little factoid for you and your audience, the medal itself is not known as the Congressional Medal of Honor. It is known as the Medal of Honor. The word congressional only applies to the society. And the society exists to preserve the legacy of the medal, and to make sure that the bravest of the brave, some of whom made the ultimate sacrifice for our country, are never forgotten. But it's also, Rick, it's about inspiring Americans to live what we call the Medal of Honor life. And the reason that's important is because, a microscopically small percentage of those that ever served in the military earn a Medal of Honor. And that's another thing that's important in that world. You never win the Medal of Honor, and you know that. You earn it. It's awarded to you. You are not a winner, you're a recipient. But in any event, back to the point, so just so few ever earn that honor. But all of us can live a Medal of Honor life or aspire to earn a Medal of Honor life. And what that means is about living the life that the medal represents around courage, sacrifice, integrity, commitment, patriotism, and citizenship. Those are the values on which the society is based and the medal represents. And the last thing that the society does, and I touched on this earlier, but I'd underline it, is make sure that the stories of those brave men and one woman, by the way, who are recipients of the medal, make sure those stories are told so that they're not forgotten, but so that they might inspire others. And so that, in essence, is what the society is about. And Rick, if you'd like me to, I can talk a little bit about the partnership
Yeah,
between the
please.
trust and
And
the.
wasn't the medal first awarded to Civil War soldiers?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Actually, inspiration for it from none other than Abraham Lincoln. And for decades, it was actually our only medal for bravery in combat. And that's why, of the roughly 3,500 recipients of the medal, the majority are from the Civil War. But to come back to then the partnership between the American Battlefield Trust and the Medal of Honor Society, it's based on values, like all the best partnerships are, right? So much commonality in how they look at the world and what's important in America today. And so the partnership has a number of facets. I think the most important one, if you'll allow me to take a minute on, is something we call the Medal of Honor Valor Trail. And the Valor Trail exists virtually and in real space and time. And so it's about telling the stories. It's about a trail that is linked on the ground and in social media and digital, that tells the stories of recipients at birthplaces, at battlefields, might be at cemeteries, could be in a hometown, a town square, and seeks to inform Americans and any who visit a little bit about the life that that recipient lived before they earned the medal, why they earned the medal, and that's about the citation, if you will, and then the life they led after, because almost all of them, Rick, were really young. When you think about our
Yeah,
soldiers, right,
yeah.
and airmen and seamen, yeah, some of them teenagers. The youngest recipient, by the way, 12 years old, a drummer, a drummer boy in the Civil War. But in any event, so what did they do with their lives after? In the 60, 70, in some cases 80 years that they lived, and most all of them lived what we call the Medal of Honor life. They continued to inspire. They continued to live a life based on commitment and sacrifice and integrity and all of that. So we're really excited about the trail in general. It's still in development, still in early days, but we have this year in development for launch next year a mobile experience. And we're excited about that. We're working to develop that with an outfit by the name of Spevco, which some of your listeners might know, in Winston-Salem, to take our show on the road. And we think the timing, as you mentioned earlier, next year is our 250th. And so we think the timing of that'll be good. And so we're gonna take that to towns and cities and battlefields, birthplaces, and all of that next year. And we're excited to be able to tell the story that way too.
Well, we're in such a interesting time in our country, even though we've always been at interesting times. I think that's the
That's a
historic,
safe statement.
I mean, everybody thinks that we have this political turmoil that is brand new. I think it started with Mr. Adams and Mr. Jefferson. The difference is they remained cordial to one another while they vehemently disagreed.
Yeah.
But I know this: there are no political parties on a battlefield. I mean, suddenly it's a different set of values. It's a different set of principles. It's a different set of ideals. And, I think these stories can inspire Americans of every age, again, to do what you started saying earlier. You may not have a chance to save someone's life on a battlefield, but you can live a life that reflects the same kind of values of a Medal of Honor recipient. And
Without a
how
doubt.
better to do that than to understand the story?
Yeah, that's so important to the society, Rick, that they have for a number of years now implemented the what they call their citizen awards, where they have recognized and honored citizens, not members of the military, but citizens, everyday folks, if you will, that have either lived over the course of many years a Medal of Honor life or committed, if you will, an extraordinary act of bravery. And that has become a big part of the society. And as they were developing that, they also recognized how important it was to reach young people, and so developed what they call their character development program based on those values I mentioned: courage, commitment, citizenship, sacrifice, all of that. That's actually a curriculum, Rick, that teachers can access and that they can help their students understand what it is to live a Medal of Honor life, and in that way, maybe inspire.
Well, I started today's podcast reminding the listeners that our generation, baby boomers, I mean, we've had so many conflicts, you know, in our early ages, it was Korea and then to Vietnam. And,
Yeah.
you know, Reagan went to Grenada. We had, you know, Desert Storm. We had Bosnia. We had Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, you know, so many people have served in the military. And not only are you serving the country, but you're serving that person next to you. You know, you're trying to, and that's where so many of these acts of valor occurred, where people just threw caution to the wind and said, I've got to take care of my brother in a unique way. The stories are unbelievable, each and every one of them.
Yeah, they are. They're beyond comprehension, many of them. And yet, you know, Rick, I've had the privilege of getting to know a number of the recipients over the last couple of years that I've been doing this work. And for all their heroism and bravery, they are the most humble group of people that I've ever met. The most self-effacing, gracious. It's remarkable. If anyone would have the right, if you will, to kind of puff their chest out and think they were something special, it would be someone who'd earned a Medal of Honor, right? No, not at all.
Just the opposite, isn't it? Yeah.
It absolutely is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're remarkable people in so many ways.
Well, before we let you go, obviously the American Battlefield Trust depends on private support.
Yes.
So how if you wanted to be involved with the ABT, how would you do that?
Call me.
I like that answer. Yeah, we can circumvent everything. We can go right to the source. I love that.
That's, but you know, that touches on one of the primary responsibilities I have for the trust, and that is to, you know, obviously it takes money to tell these stories, to fulfill the mission of the trust. And the trust is extraordinarily adept at grassroots fundraising. And the society is good at that as well. But corporate support is important, especially if we're going to fund new initiatives like the mobile experience that I mentioned to you. And so certainly the way to learn more is to go to battlefields.org. That's the Trust's website. If any of your listeners would like to learn more about the Valor Trail, that's valortrail.org. But you can, if you would like to, anybody that makes an inquiry to you, if you'd like to give them my contact details, I would be really appreciative of that.
Yeah, I can't think of a better way to celebrate America's 250th birthday than to have a corporation say, let me create a legacy, you know, because the 250th I see is not just about looking back, but it's looking back with understanding of how it will lead us forward for the next 250 years. And
True.
And I think the only way you do that is having exposure to these stories, to these places that, you know, you build a shopping mall on top of a battlefield, you're never getting it back.
So true.
And so it's lost forever. So I commend the work that you're doing and that the American Battlefield Trust is doing, and the great work that the Congressional Medal of Honor Society does to honor those that are serving us and have served us in so many ways. So I really appreciate you being here with me today. It's I think it's a great project for you. It's almost like everything you've done in your career has led you to this. You know, I talk about when we were young, we wanted to be successful. As we get a little older, we want to be significant. And there's a difference.
There is.
Yeah. And this is a very significant project that I know is near and dear to your heart. And I commend you for doing it. And I wish you great luck as you continue to pursue these new projects on behalf of both of those organizations. So,
Thank you so much, Rick. Always a pleasure to be with you, my friend.
all right. Thanks, pal.